Great to see you and great to meet you. So thank you, Federico, for this very kind presentation and hello to all the PhD students there and to the dear colleagues of my former university, because I don't forget my 12 wonderful years spent at Bicocca University. So great to see you. So this is why I'm so grateful and it's so happy to for this invitation. So thank you. Okay, I'm a philosopher of biology and an evolutionary biologist here at the Department of Biology at the University of Padua. And as you have seen in the title, I'd like to discuss with you this idea of COVID-19 and pandemic phenomena from an evolutionary perspective, from an evolutionary point of view. I have to say in advance that I don't want to spend all my time with my presentation, so I would be really glad to share with you thoughts and questions and comments so afterwards. So I will leave more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes for that at the end. So why this title? Why this proposal for you as PhD students? Because I think that we need in biology a perspective related to deep time, related to remote causes of the biological phenomenon, like COVID-19, for example. And also because I'd like to share with you some ideas and thoughts and reflections about science communication and the importance of science communication for you. You will be the scientists and researchers of the future. And I think that you have to be aware about the difficulties and the importance of science communication today. So my starting point is this one. I don't have slides because I'd like to share with you some informal thoughts and discussion. So my point here is so far we have interpreted in the public debate and even in science the COVID-19 pandemic from multiple angles. Okay, so the epidemiological one, of course, the clinical one. We are searching for the vaccine, so healthcare, social, and even political aspect of the pandemic. But all these perspectives are based on the present and what we have to do today and how can we come out from this emergence. What is missing for me is a vision based on the deep time. And what does it mean? Let's start with a very simple fact that you know very well as biologists and molecular biologists. I suppose you know that about 20%, more or less, of our DNA, of human DNA, comes from viruses. People are not aware about that. It's a very strange element that we have to discuss. And from a philosophical and evolutionary perspective, this means that our genome is not pure. And that's great because nothing is pure in biology, fortunately. It means that not all DNA is made up of protein coding genes. There's much more. That's another important topic related to the different components of our DNA. But mostly, it means that our ancestors, since we were born in Africa about 200 millennia ago, survived many pandemics, have survived many phenomena like those. So COVID-19 is an old story in a first sense. COVID-19 comes from a very long way off. So we have all the reasons in order to interpret COVID-19 in evolutionary terms. And in evolutionary biology, maybe you know that the relationships between pathogens like viruses, bacteria, and microorganisms and so on, and their hosts are explained through a wonderful metaphor, a Lewis Carroll metaphor of the Red Queen. What is the Red Queen? The Red Queen means that, maybe you remember that, the Red Queen means that you have to run faster and faster to appear firm and stable compared to the environment and to to an ever-changing and moving environment. So the evolution in the Red Queen mode is a continuous game of moves and counter moves, of challenges, reactions, and new challenges, or technically speaking, adaptations and co-adaptations. And we know that the risk in these art races is the fact that the host could be quite always a bit late, a bit behind the pathogens, which change, we know, faster and diversify better than we do. And in the case of COVID-19, of course, we are the host. And the pathogen, and the new, genetically new pathogen appeared out of the blue. So therefore, we must be very careful with viruses, and we have to explain that to the public. With viruses such as RNA virus like COVID-19, for at least for different reasons, okay? And I want to point out, to figure out four main reasons why we have to deal with these viruses, and we have to be careful. The first one, in evolutionary terms, is that RNA viruses are much older than us. Much older than us in evolutionary terms. They have been running around the planet for at least 3 billion years. While we think that maybe, according to one of the different hypotheses about the origin of life, maybe before the last universal common ancestor in an RNA world, probably, likely, the very initial organisms or something like a protobionts in the earth could be very similar to the current RNA virus. So anyway, RNA viruses are much older than us, while we are a very young species, a very young African species. So for billions of years, viruses have evolved strategies to infect bacteria first, then since 600 million years ago, multicellular plants, and then multicellular animals, and so on, until Homo sapiens. So this is the first reason. They are much older than us. The second reason is still very important. Viruses respect, for me, as a Darwinian thinker, viruses respect and obey a very simple logic. They have to make copies of themselves using the cells of others as vehicles of diffusion. So they are perfect replicators. We are big multicellular mammals. We have hundreds of cellular kinds and types. We have thousands of different functions, while virus has just one main function: to make copies of themselves. And it's able to do that with a very simple structure, in functional and structural terms, an RNA strand surrounded by a protein capsule. And this very simple structure minimizes the resources and costs needed to obtain the maximum benefit from a Darwinian point of view, that is replication and multiplication. So it's very efficient. It's as something wrote, it's a biological machine, okay, very different with respect to us. So with one single very dominant function. So this is an advantage in Darwinian terms. The third reason is that viruses, especially RNA viruses, mutate and change. This session is titled Changes in Nature. So these viruses mutate much faster than we do, because you know very well, RNA is a more unstable nucleic acid and so on. So they have much more variability and possibility of change, more fuel for the engine of evolution, natural selection, more fuel, more combinations. However, you know that this COVID-19 surprisingly changes little, because it has efficient mechanism of correction of the mutations. But in any case, it was born from maybe from a genetic recombination between a bat virus and another virus of an intermediate host, perhaps pangolins, we don't know. Yet anyway, they are faster than we are in evolution and in speciation, so in the birth of new strains, of new population of viruses, even by rapid recombination from different viruses coming from different animal hosts. So they are faster than us, another great advantage. Finally, we have to consider a fourth point. Homo sapiens, so from our point of view, Homo sapiens is a great host for viruses. It's great for their point of view, because we are a social and mobile mammal, just like bats. So we are mobile and social mammals, quite exactly like bats. So thanks to our individual genetic diversity, that is our best evolutionary defense, we know, COVID-19 affects some of us very lightly, with few or no symptoms at all, others more heavily, and still others severely, unfortunately, and lethally. Nevertheless, even this is a very good evolutionary strategy for the virus, because the host with mild and light symptoms infect many other people longer and more easily, rather than patients quickly isolated in intensive care. So it's another strategy, the diversification of the effect of the infection. So this is very well known. I think that we have the duty to share this evolutionary knowledge with the general audience. But I think there's something more that could be even much more important. After consideration of all these reasons, we should be even more aware and concerned, because there is additional reasons, at least a fifth reason, that is more recent in evolutionary terms, that is more related to the ecological expansion and behavior of a human species, that could be very important. When the Spanish flu struck humanity a century ago, we were about 2 billion human beings on Earth. Now we are almost 4 times as much, 8 billion, 4 times as much. In addition, compared to that time, we travel crowded in on trains, ships, and airplanes. So the viruses take the airplanes with us. I discussed a lot about this topic in these months with people like Jared Diamond, the great anthropologist in Los Angeles, or David Quammen, that published and Spillover, the bestseller Spillover, predicting something that happened in these months. So, okay, that's a great difference with respect to the last very known pandemic. We know that there are many other pandemics similar to the COVID-19 in Africa, for example, but now this is just a comparison with a century of time in the middle. So, in this comparison, we understand another very critical point. The Homo so-called sapiens has been implementing for decades some behaviors that promote the likelihood that viruses can spill over, so they can do zoonosis. Just few examples: the growing deforestation and the devastation and reduction of the natural habitats of animals that are reservoir of viruses able to pass to humans throughout the equatorial and tropical belt. This is an example of behavior that promotes the likelihood of pandemics like COVID-19. Another one is poaching and the illegal trade in exotic animals, which is, according to the Interpol, the International Police, is now the 4th illegal trafficking in the world, after drugs, weapons, and human beings. the illegal trade in exotic animals for nutrition or for traditional nutrition and for traditional medicine in many regions of the world, not only China and Southeast Asia. And then another example that it's not enough because we have deforestation, poaching, illegal trade, and then we have the transportation and bulking of these animals in wet markets without any minimal hygienic conditions. All this propelled by the demand for these animals as food and for the alleged superstitious traditional medicines without any scientific basis. Okay, and we call ourselves Homo sapiens. So we became, I say in a very provocative way, I say that we became a perfect host for viruses. Okay, and in addition, we do our best to promote them. So we became good allies for viruses. And this is completely illogical and this is completely irrational from every point of view, including the economic point of view, including the economic one, because the costs of a pandemic such as COVID-19 are much higher than the illegal and legal, I don't care about it, legal gains, economic gains that we could have from the exploitation of ecosystems and animals. So it's completely logical, even from a very, very rough economic perspective. Okay, so the missing side for me of the COVID-19 discussion in science and in public debate too is exactly this one: the deep ecological nexus of pandemics. The ecologic connection of the pandemic. The evidence that pandemics are, for me, a chapter within the more general book of the environmental crisis and of the general book of the costs of the environmental crisis. And we have to say that. We have to I think, to deepen our understanding of these aspects. In evolutionary biology, and this is my second model that I'd like to share with you. The first one was the Red Queen, okay? The continuous game of moves and counter moves between pathogens and hosts. And this is the first evolutionary model that I think could be very useful in order to understand what is happening. The second one is what we call niche construction. Because we have a name for such a process, such recursive process. What is niche construction? In fact, you know that some organisms in nature have an active strategy of adaptation. It means that they don't limit themselves to respond to environmental challenges and demands and pressures, but some organisms are able to modify the environment to make it more suitable for their survival and reproduction. So for the Darwinian fitness. For example, the soil warm activities that was already studied by Charles Darwin and published in a wonderful final last book written by Darwin the year before he died. It's a wonderful example of niche construction because they changed the soil, and they, according to what Darwin wrote, they shaped the British landscape. So they are niche constructors, niche builders. The beaver dams are another very famous example. Okay, organisms change the ecological niche in order to have more fitness. So by modifying and building their ecological niches, these species, that's the very important point, pass on their offspring different lines of inheritance, because you have, of course, the vertical line of genes, you have the vertical lines of inheritance of cultural evolution in the case of Homo sapiens, but also in the case of of other species, for example, both bird species and primate species. So you have ideas, innovations, new traditions, and you have a line of vertical cultural inheritance, but also you have a third line of inheritance, the biological, the cultural, and the ecological one, because you have ecological changes that are inherited by the next generation. So you, at your generation, you have introduced ecological changes, and the people arriving after you will inherit these ecological changes. So what does niche construction have to do with COVID-19 and with the environmental crisis? I suppose that you can see that we, Homo sapiens, are the largest and most successful builders of niches and niche constructors in the evolution as ever. Because for millennia, we have been changing the world around us to make it more suitable for us, or at least less hostile for us. So our descendants, generation by generation, inherit from us genes, ideas, and ecological changes, anthropic ecological changes. For example, climate change in an evolutionary perspective. Now we are studying, even here in the Department of Biology, here in Padua, we are studying a lot the impact of climate change on animals, plants, and humans, of course. But from an evolutionary perspective, what is climate change? Climate change is a great experiment in niche construction, because now we have to adapt to an environment that our predecessors and we have intentionally changed and disrupted in this case. So it's a recursive process. We change the world, and the world changes us. And you know that adaptation has indeed become the key word in any international documents on climate change today. And adaptation is an evolutionary word. So the exploitation of the environment and is a process of niche construction, and for a long time, it's given us great success, great demographic success, great economic growth, and so on. So I'm not saying that it's a bad process. It's an important, fundamental process for human evolution, okay? However, niche construction, has quite every natural phenomenon, can be ambivalent and can be even a dangerous game, a dangerous process. And according to some philosophers of biology, according to some evolutionists, it can lead us even into what we call an evolutionary trap. What is an evolutionary trap? An evolutionary trap is a situation in which you have the changes introduced by one generation that could be unexpectedly expensive and dramatic for the next generation. Because niche construction could be a very rapid process of change in nature and in culture, of course. So in our eco-cultural niches. So the faster we change the environment and the harder we adapt ourselves to the changes we cause. So it's a recursive process. So the environmental crisis is presenting us, for me, with exactly this costs in many ways. Costs are the feedback, negative feedback effects from the most violent and frequent atmospheric phenomenon that we see today due to climate change to the pandemics. So pandemics, like atmospheric, violent atmospheric phenomena, weather phenomena, are very old, okay? They always were there, but today they become more frequent and more violent. And this is an environmental ecological change that we caused, that we introduced. It's anthropic. So it's all connected, pandemics, environmental crisis, and so on. And when I say that it's all connected, it's not something like a new age claim of holism and connection. It's science, it's evolution. And I have to remind that evolution, the theory of evolution is an ecological theory. based on ecological relationships. So, summing up, we are paying the price for our changes as niche constructors. Okay. In short, we can say that we are red queens, okay, but we are red queens who has to run faster and faster because the red queen herself is changing the environment more and more dramatically, okay? So niche construction gives us some lessons, and I'm going to conclude and then to leave the floor to your questions, comments, and so on. Two lessons mainly. The first lesson is that that when a pandemic strikes us, like this year, we must act both on its proximate causes. So therefore, healthcare, vaccine, and other scientific gifts, I would say. But let me tell you that listening for the debate that we have today, these weeks in the public audience, in the mass media, I think that we should understand in Italy, but not only in Italy, that scientific research is important not only when we need it, because we are sick, we are in the hospital, we are in intensive care, but always before and after the emergencies. Anyway, this is just a point. But okay, we must act both on the proximate causes and on the remote causes of the phenomena. Then we have to remove the deep ecological factors in order to avoid or make the next pandemic less likely. That's very important for me. The second lesson is that by understanding the evolutionary logic of this crisis, we can put ourselves, I would say, in the shoes of our enemy, in the evolutionary logic of our enemy, and identify his weaknesses. Viruses, we know, have four main enemies. One is hygiene and social behaviors like those that we see today in our daily life. Social justice and universal access to health, because we know that inequalities are at the same time the cause and consequence of pandemics. Third, the urgent defense of the environment and species conservation. And fourth, finally, scientific research, okay? The importance of which we should realize not only when we need it. So it's clear for me that this pandemic has been also, just a few words about science communication, has been a shock for science communication as well, and for the science and society relationships. You will become scientists, so, and hopefully, and you should reflect on the importance and difficulties of science communication. We have seen in these months the early uncertainties about the virus, the contradictory messages, even badly, the quarrels and the fights between scientists live on TV screens. And from the other side, we have seen the completely unreasonable request to science to provide rapidly certainties that science cannot provide for its methodology. And scientists, we have seen scientists who run for elections on the wave of their media visibility and so on. So we have seen a lot of things. And I think that it's time for all scientists who have underestimated the importance of science communication to be self-critical now. Because the problem is not only the poor scientific literacy of Italian citizens, but also the fact that science must update its languages, its ways in which it shares in a transparent way its methodologies, its works, its results, its debates, and so on. In science communication, for example, we should admit much more, and this is my suggestion for your future research and career. We should admit much more our ignorance and say okay, you have a question from a journalist, and in some cases could happen that you have to answer, we don't know. We don't know yet. We are investigating. And for example, today we don't know enough about virus biodiversity. We would need a global virome, for example, a genetic library of all known viruses and their possible mutations, and so on. So we are ignorant. But it's a good kind of ignorance. So summing up and concluding, my idea is that science communication and science communicators and scientists in this global case should emphasize more the ecological connections of the phenomena, should highlight the role of prevention in order to avoid the next pandemic. So we must cultivate, as scientists and philosophers of science, foresight, the ability to see in the future and to prevent the future. It's not easy for our mind, but we have to work for that. We have to remind everyone that science can be slow science. We regret this. We don't like it, but it's necessary to have guarantees on the results, despite any geopolitical and nationalistic interest or a rush to find the vaccine, for example. And in the case of vaccine, my idea, but I'm ready to discuss it. My idea is that it's right that the companies that will obtain the vaccine or the different vaccines for COVID-19 will have a profit, but the vaccine must then be public and for everyone, because the fruits of science are common goods at the end. And our constitution, our wonderful Italian constitution, says that the Republic promotes science exactly for this reason. And mostly, I think science communication should value more the fact that science has to do with uncertainty and ignorance. And as I said, an ignorance that this paradoxically is generative of ever new and new knowledge. And doing so, you as a scientist, as a young scientist, you will be able to share with the general audience not only your product, your results, your discoveries. So not only science as a product, but also, that's much more important, science, your work, your job as a process, as a fallible, imperfect, but wonderful human enterprise. So this human enterprise, for me, has found that viruses are more effective than we are in the Darwinian game, that we are vulnerable, that we are connected to the rest of the biosphere, and that we are not indispensable for the biosphere. That's very important for me. And viruses have inhabited the Earth long before us, and they will also inhabit the Earth likely after us. So this is the most important lessons that I learned from Darwin and from evolution, and that I would call it evolutionary humility. So to be aware that we are just a small part of a great system that we call biosphere, and that the most great part of the biosphere is made by viruses, bacteria, and very Darwinian effective organisms. So thank you so much again for this invitation, and now I'm ready for any discussion. It will be a pleasure with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
It's been a pleasure. I hope to see you soon in Bicocca, physically. Bye-bye.
Bye.